All right. Good afternoon. So my name is Gopi, and my background is in a subject that is quite different than what I'm going to talk to you about. I'm a physicist. And the reason for picking this topic is multifold. One, it is something that I can speak of from experience. And two, it's something that I've spent also quite a bit of time trying to bring some of the exact methods of thinking that you're taught in the sciences to a topic like this, which is extremely explosive. And that's the reason for saying we are trying to navigate the question of race. And the method of navigating is what I want to explore with you. Because as it stands right now, it's like navigating that minefield. You try to avoid stepping on it, hope nothing blows up. And if it does, you make a quick retreat. You apologize. Sometimes you get fired. All of these things are part and parcel of our modern day life. So let's dive into it and try to see how some of the methods of thinking that anthroposophy gives us has a role to play in this whole thing. So I want to put two pictures in front of you. On the left, you have one of those old images from British magazines, most likely Punch or one of those. And you have the classic image of how both the British and to some extent India saw themselves. You have the repercussions of this in many ways echoing through the years into present day India as well. I mean, it is not necessarily as literal, as personified as it is shown there, but something of it still lives. There is still a feeling of inferiority, and there is still, many a time when we come to the US or when we come to different countries around the world, as Indians, you do face this. It's a reality. You do face a certain feeling of superiority, and I kind of joke that we suddenly gain an invisibility cloak. You enter a room, sometimes people don't notice that you're there. So these kind of things happen. So how do we go about it? And then from the other side, you have this contrasting picture with Annie Besant and Jiddu Krishnamurti. By the way, we pronounce it Murti. Jiddu Krishnamurti was heavily promoted by the Theosophical Society and raised up as Alcyone. I mean, he was supposed to be the next Messiah. So you have this extremely contrasting pictures in front of you. And now the question is, how do we relate these two? Because if we stay with it, we can think about it, we can feel angry or not angry about it, we can feel, depending on your point of view, or we can say, you know what, that's just the past and forget about it. But is there a way to navigate it? So now there are two people who really tried to navigate this the best they could. And the one on the left is Tagore, and the one on the right is Mahatma Gandhi. Now, both of these individuals were thrown right in the middle of the flux between Britain and India. And they were kind of extraordinary from both points of view. Even the people internationally recognized both these individuals, and locally as well, they were much loved. But their approach was quite different. Gandhi's approach was with masses of people, huge sections of Indian society. He also targeted our own internal contradictions with regard to the question of race. We also had our own little racial system with the four castes. And he was one who went straight into the bathroom and started cleaning it, violating every single rule of the division of the Varnas in ancient India. Whereas Tagore came to it completely from the other direction. He was an internationalist. He was somebody who not only rejuvenated their own local language, but introduced a lot of international spirit into what he was trying to do. So he was more outward facing in that sense. He wrote about nations. He wrote about all the different cultures. He wrote about Japan. He wrote about Britain, of course. And he was somebody who yearned after cosmopolitanism. He reached it to a certain level. Gandhi's face was more turned inwards to the Indian nation. So, in the midst of all this hubbub between the two races, you have individualities coming up. And so then the question is, how do you handle individuality in the midst of the question of race? And that is what we are going to tackle. So, if we want to do that, first, we have the extremely difficult business of defining race. And right here is the threshold for academia, because this is where everybody struggles, stumbles, and many times dissolves the arguments. So what's happening here? It's extremely hard. You get every shade of color. If we are really talking about skin color, you get every shade of color in human society. You get every variation in skull shapes, if you want to go the old way, you get every single differentiation present. And it is quite hard to say where one stops and where the other begins. So when you have this kind of situation, then people usually resort to statistics. Somehow it is still acceptable to talk about having indigenous American heritage or an African heritage or an Asian heritage, because the problem is sanitized a little bit and pushed only into the domain of biology. It's easier to handle. You can deal with it with DNA and stuff. So that's a more, acceptable thing today. So everybody does this. Everybody has, I can find out so many people have gone into 23andMe and got their genetic test and been very surprised that they're 0.1% black. And these kind of things happens often. But what is the underlying issue? The underlying issue is that the way we define things is challenged by race. And it is challenged not just by race, but it is also challenged with regard to the living world. And that's where I want to take you next. When we look at definitions in the mineral world, it's just made to be put into boxes. It is perfect. You have crystal systems, right? In physics, we learn crystal systems. There are 7 crystal systems. And any other combination of crystal systems, you can bring it back down to these 7. You can bring it back down to what they call 14 Bravais lattices. You can do this, you can do that, but everything is literally crystal clear. Everything fits. And then, of course, all you have to do is get out of that lab in which you're studying that crystal, and you will see something like this. You enter the plant world, where immediately all those clear definitions you have been busy shaping with your university education just collapses. Now, of course, this did not deter academicians from moving ahead, surging ahead naturally. And what this led to was that. So once people encountered the multifold variety of the living world, immediately their definitions started blowing up, going out of control. Look at what they're saying in this paper that was very recent, 2013 paper that I pulled this from. And they're saying the existence of species itself is somewhat controversial. Sound familiar? Especially in plants where asexuality, hybridization, so on and so forth, may render the definition and delimitation of species complex and fuzzy. Some argue that species are arbitrary constructs of the human mind. Sound familiar? While others claim that they are objective, discrete entities. So you have the struggle, obviously, and the species numbers go up like crazy, 352,000, 390,000, 420,000. And you have diagrams like this back from the time of Linnaeus in botany, moving on and on ahead. So this is what happens when you bring your crystallized thinking into the living world. You suddenly have an endless copies of this crystallized labels and you struggle. Why? And the reason is we have not upgraded our thought in order to get to this point. And that's where we are looking at Goethe. Goethe was one who was able to introduce metamorphosis, a true metamorphosis. And what did he do? He actually upgraded his way of observing things and way of coming to concepts so that the concept became alive. So suddenly, from this vast majority, thousands and thousands of species, you have what he's saying. The archetypal plant is the most wonderful creation. One can invent plants ad infinitum. There you go. He already did it infinity. So that is how you then go into the plant world, because now even your categories of flower and leaf and everything, they start morphing and changing. And of course, those who are well versed with Goethean science know this. So when you take a look at this, you see that you have to be able to upgrade your capacity. You have to accelerate it. You have to amp it up. You have to level it up. And the same process then continues into aesthetics. Goethe kind of called him the father of aesthetics. And why? Because he brought something to this world, which once again, in today's world, we think of aesthetics mostly as subjective, nothing objective about it. You know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder and what have you. Everything is very relational, which is correct in one perspective, because it is not easy to reduce this variety into something concrete. But Goethe did that. And nearly 200 years ago, he created this color circle out of the entirety of the color world. Now you can think, if you mistake what Goethe is doing and try to apply your definition, you might think he is creating labels for colors. You might think he's using the same crystal definitions, but in reality, he's not. He's actually upgraded it. And most recent research by physicists, and this is even more recent, I think 2015, and they also agree with him that there are 6 distinct colors out of which you can create the infinite variety of colors. And they came to it mathematically. So you have a kind of, increase in the aesthetics. And right here in this place in Harvard Divinity School, approximately 200 years ago, once again, you had Ralph Waldo Emerson talking about objectivity, not only of aesthetics, but of morals. And he was underlining this. He was saying, the intuition of the moral sentiment is an insight of the perfection of the laws of the soul, not mineral laws, laws of the soul. And these laws execute themselves. And then he obviously says that, he rebelled against the authority of the church, which was kind of pressing down upon America of the time. And of course, he became extremely unpopular the moment he did that. And then he says, I look for the new teacher. In a sense, he is seeking a body of knowledge and a teacher who can teach this. And that is what we are now coming to. Now, when we come to moral distinction, there is always a hierarchy. Now, you cannot say anything about this topic without taking into account that there is always a hierarchy. This was the old one, the light-colored races, the dark-colored races. But now we have replaced it with this hierarchy, anti-racism and racism. Now, what happens in this case? We are still stuck trying to push a label onto something very dynamic. So what happens is the racist or the knowledge of race goes crushed into the subconscious, doesn't get really processed because there is no concept for it, and kind of bubbles underneath. And it's only with modern stand-up comedy that you get a release from the racism side onto the anti-racism side, because you have stand-up comedians talking about black people, white people, brown people all over the place, and nobody throws them out. Why? Because you're treating it lightly. You're not, giving it a huge moral weight. But the problem is this is not tenable because you still don't have the right concepts for it. So the hierarchy can be made more objective without making it straitjacket. So what I'm doing is I'm putting numbers to it, right? Simple numbers. I'll say superior, inferior, that was the old stuff. And there were obviously people in the middle who said, I don't care either way. And now you also have, of course, the same thing which I just told you about. You can have this. I mean, this is the current day. But this hierarchy, if you put it that way, the center is usually called colorblind. I don't really see color. I don't care about color. But in all of this, you're seeing humanity struggle with the difficult problem of handling how race should be seen. So, and how the morals about race should be seen. So you can see, obviously, you cannot get stuck in either of these corners, because what happens is you're stuck in the straitjacket of the crystal label. How do you get out of it? In mathematics, there is a concept called the number I, which is extremely explosive concept, because when this idea of the small I, not the capital, this I was, struggled with in mathematics, and then they finally got tired of it and they said, we'll just use it, it's useful. And then they threw it in the lap of the physicists, and the physicists recoiled in horror and wondered what in the world had just happened, because this number gives rise to quantum mechanics. And that took the world by storm. But it also gives you the clue that not only is it about 1 and -1, there is a way to go from 1 to -1 and from -1 to 1. And that is the transformative aspect that we have to introduce into the study of race. You can go where the individual overcoming the race, or the race overcoming the individual. These are movements, not categories, not static labels. That's where you want to go. You have to be able to understand things from this level. And once you do that, the human level becomes a little clearer. What is normally applied to groups and what is applied to one individual human being, you start parsing it out. For example, when you're looking at just the human morals, everyone knows that you can't simply put the human morals on animals. You cannot jail a lion because it just ate a jackal or ate a deer. That is not how it works. You cannot impose one level on the other. All of us understand that, no problem. But here is where we all have a difficulty. The same rule holds for groups of people as well. Morality works individual to individual. Morality is always personal responsibility. It has to do with the individual. When we personify an entire race, or when we personify and anthropomorphize animals, we are creating aberrations. Our conceptualization is suffering. So this is where we have to understand how things can go one way or another. There is also another aberration possible. If you completely remove the human aspect of humans, then you end up with Darwinism, because then you think of human beings as animals. Or you can also push the individuality straight into the national group or the racial group or any other group for that matter. And then your identity gets pushed into a group, which is another problem. The identity, the individuality once again suffers because of this issue. And so I'm going to give you an analog in mathematics of what we are trying to do with this whole topic. I'll lead you through that quickly. So obviously, you had 0, 1, infinity. These are numbers that mankind has struggled with for a long time. Around comes 17th century, and everybody had to deal with negative numbers in mathematics. And that threw, of course, people for a loop. They had no idea how to handle it. What do you mean -1? Is it backwards? How do you deal with it? If you go and look up the archives, you'll see the tussles there. And then, of course, you have imaginary, and then on and on and on. Each one builds on the previous, but each one challenges the mind to think of it completely differently. And then, of course, this objective thread is called mathesis. And then when you have the same thing in entire fields, you have arithmetic, geometry, algebra, complex algebra. These are ways in which you have to upgrade mathematics in order to fit the reality of the subject. Now, this is our difficulty. We are dealing with definitions, and we must be able to go into the life-filled concept of the archetype. Then you need to be able to go into the ensouled objective realm of aesthetics and morals. And then you have to be able to go into the individualized objective world of karma and reincarnation. And then, and only then, when due value has been given to the individual, can you even go into discussions of race and groups and languages and so on and so forth. Now, this is difficult. So it is much easier to kind of slide downwards. And this is what happens when you slide downwards. You already saw the statistics and stereotypes that kick in once you try to label things when they can't be fit into a box in the living world. And then, of course, once you try to do that in the soul world, there's your fuel for that mine. This is where prejudices are created. This is where things are squished into that tiny volume which don't fit there. And that's what creates the explosions, dogmatic beliefs. And that is why a lot of anthroposophy is still seen in terms of belief. It's easier. It's much easier to deal with anthroposophy as a belief, because then you don't have to struggle through so many layers of objectivity and practices. And of course, Darwinism kicks in once you deal with the human being. It can lead to enslavement, and this is what has happened historically. Social Darwinism, obviously, is the final blow in this whole thing. So whenever we speak about race, what we are actually trying to do is get up that ladder. What instead happens is there are several currents that is going down the ladder because it's the easiest. And it's true for all. It doesn't matter inside, outside, anthroposophy. It's not a tribe. It's not a group. We are trying to deal with individuals. So the whole attitude should be jump in and swim. Learn how to swim. Steiner was somebody who began to swim upstream, and he started, teaching people how to do that. Of course, you can stay on the bank and take photographs. You can take detailed photographs and spend enormous amount of time behind it. And when the guy says, hey, come on, jump in, you say, oh, no. I want to do it in a ethic way, not an emic way I need to do it as an outsider. I need to be objective. That's the fallacy that's kicking in. We have to be able to jump in and swim. And it's much easier to do that. This is a primary problem. The blind man and the elephant. Once you do not bring up these capacities, you struggle with this. This is what we always see. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's a cult. Oh, it's pseudoscience. It's conspiracy theory. And you see these labels flung all over the place. And of course, it's a new age mixture of all the old stuff, And the same problem occurs even with Rudolf Steiner. Who's Rudolf Steiner? Oh, well, he's a pseudoscientist. He's a mystic. He's a philosopher. He's a racist chauvinist. He's a conspiracy theorist, a guru, God forbid, and worst of all, a plagiarist. So different variations of this. All of these are failures to come to terms with the kinds of thinking that are demanded. This does not value the individual, because when we think we are being anti-racist without going through the things that actually make human beings valuable, you're not helping anyone. And so that's why when objectivity fails, you have enormous things happening where people struggle and people here struggle. And that's one of the things. Like Staudenmayer, he flat out rejects even the scientific premise. He says, I'm a person who makes copious use of insinuations and innuendos in polemical context. There goes the scientific spirit right out the window. We can't even begin to speak about objectivity. And then, of course, certain areas are difficult for people, so they prefer to leave it out. And that happens in practice. Our friend here, Christian, he says Waldorf principles can be applied in a genuine way without any regard to the notions of karma and reincarnation. And then empirical evidence and so on. And then, of course, you have Helmut, who struggles because he comes from a Catholic theology background and he wants to make anthroposophy religion so desperately. You get access to grind in this process. The moment you don't cross the soul world correctly, you end up people with access to grind. Corey over here as well is like, I believe much of what Steiner said about races is wrong, which is all right. Any conscious or unconscious leanings towards the white centrist view. So what happens here is they treat Rudolf Steiner as if he is a plant and the soil determines him. And that is the understanding that kicks in. You get displacement of category. You're trying to develop a hermeneutic view, but what you end up getting stuck with is a kind of thinking which is more suitable to the life world, not to the conscious human world. And so then you have a friend Ansgar here is trying very hard to put all sorts of labels. He's like, oh, we are wavering between universalism, individualism, cultural chauvinism, race. Of course, that's what you're going to get with the labels. It's for crystals, not for people. And then, of course, you have also Hartmut Traub, who comes from the background of Fichte. He, of course, claims that whatever Steiner did was plagiarizing Fichte. And then the most significant, even religious central theme in this topic is treated by him as a temporary failure. So this is the kind of stuff that kicks in. So last slide, I just have to say a warning with regard to the critical academic approach that we all need to keep in mind. Well-intentioned it may be, but we have to watch out for the subjective psychological projections. You come with an agenda, and that's what you end up seeing. We have to be able to go through moral aesthetics that Goethe and Emerson schooled us with. Then you cannot say that, we have to understand that is the situation. And this method, whenever it avoids the mathesis and the living thinking, we are not even entering, we are not upgrading academia so that it can handle anthroposophy. And then finally, if we do not do this, if we do not take Steiner's kind of invitation to jump in and swim, do it. Churn your mind, churn your thought process, upgrade it from the inside, go through those crises. Unless you do that, the excessive academic approach might just relegate anthroposophy to dusty shelves in libraries. That is not what we want. What we want is people entering with this down to every single corner of the earth and every single university, just like this, and taking things forward. With that, I end. Thank you for your attention.